Hi there, my name's Marlene. And yes, I was the one standing in the middle of the mall when my sister laughed at me like I didn't belong, like I was just background noise in my own life. She had no idea the staff would call me boss. No idea the company she was trying to work for was mine. But that moment, that wasn't the worst part. The real hurt? It started long before the mall, with family dinners where I was invisible, birthdays where I barely existed. A mother who handed down heirlooms like love came with conditions. You ever been treated like the backup plan in your own family? Because I have. And what happened next might just surprise you. Greenview Mall smelled like synthetic vanilla and cinnamon pretzels. The floors gleamed too bright, like they were trying to cover up how dull everything else felt. I was only there for a walkthrough, just a quiet check-in before the showroom launch next week. But I should have known better. As I walked past the center atrium, my sister's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Oh my God, look at her!" Cherie laughed, loud enough to draw eyes from the bench of teenage girls nearby. "Who even dresses like that to go shopping? She looks like she's auditioning for a job she'll never get." I didn't stop. I didn't even turn my head. But I heard it all. Her friend giggled, probably not realizing who I was. That made it worse somehow. My grip tightened around the leather strap of my crossbody bag. I had on a dark blazer and jeans, simple, efficient, professional. But to Cherie, anything that didn't sparkle or show cleavage was ripe for ridicule. A staffer from the tech booth near the pop-up showroom spotted me and rushed over. "Miss Kasmarek," he said, handing me a tablet. "We updated the floor projection based on your specs. Let me know what you think, boss." Cherie stopped mid-laugh. I felt it. A weird drop in the air, like the AC had suddenly kicked colder. My eyes met hers for half a second. Just enough. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then looked around, realizing the workers in branded black shirts were watching me, not her. That this showroom didn't just happen to bear my company's logo, it was mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just nodded politely to the staff and moved toward the back section to review display positioning. Behind me, I could hear her trying to recover, changing the subject, fake laughing, brushing it off like she hadn't just humiliated herself. But I didn't stay to witness it. I didn't have to. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to shrink me. In our family, Cherie had always been the one people noticed. The performer, the beauty, the girl who wore sequins to school events and turned every backyard barbecue into a fashion shoot. And me? I was the quiet one, the serious one, the girl who fixed the Wi-Fi and didn't mind sitting at the kid table well into my 20s. Cherie once told me, without irony, that I was born to be background music. She meant it as a joke. I smiled like it was one. I learned early how to turn silence into armor, how to measure my worth without applause. But the sting of her words still echoed, even now in my 30s, as a woman who built a tech firm from a kitchen table and turned it into a multi-million-dollar platform. And yet to her, I'd always be the boring one. I remember vividly Claudine's 60th birthday. Our mother had gathered the whole family at a fancy restaurant in uptown Charlotte. Linen tablecloths, candlelight, the works. After dessert, she made a small speech, then pulled out a box. Inside was a gold necklace passed down from her grandmother. A piece with sentimental value, something I knew she wore only on special occasions. "I want you to have it," she said, holding it out to Cherie. My heart didn't break exactly, but it did stumble. Cherie beamed. "Oh my God, Mom, it's beautiful!" I cleared my throat. "Wait, I thought that was going to be shared between us someday." Claudine just waved it off, not cruelly, but with that gentle condescension mother's perfect over time. "You're not into these things, Marlene. You don't really go out much, sweetheart." The table chuckled, and just like that, I was 12 again, opening a homemade birthday card while Cherie unwrapped a karaoke machine from Dad. There had never been enough space for both of us to shine, and I had stopped trying to elbow my way in a long time ago. Back in the present, I checked the showroom's display lighting, tapped through the digital projections, and made a few notes on the tablet. Outside the showroom glass, Cherie lingered. She wasn't laughing anymore. Her arms were crossed. Her eyebrows were furrowed. She tilted her head like she was seeing a stranger instead of her sister. I turned to speak to the floor lead, not bothering to acknowledge her. There was power in being underestimated. Later that evening, I stopped by my apartment for a late dinner. The view from my living room window stretched across the Charlotte skyline, tall glass buildings reflecting the pink-orange blur of dusk. I stood by the counter, eating reheated pasta from the night before, replaying the look on Cherie's face over and over again. It wasn't revenge I felt. It wasn't pride either. It was justice. For every time she'd called me the spinster with a laptop. For every family gathering where she joked I was probably dating my code. For every comment she whispered just loud enough to bruise. That moment in the mall didn't fix the past, but it gave me something it had taken years to claim. Presence. And then, like a small cosmic wink, my phone buzzed. A notification from our internal HR system. New applicant, Cherie Brown. Position, Senior Finance Analyst. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. She had applied. To my company, to my team, unaware that the woman whose quietness she'd mocked for years would be the one reviewing her resume. I didn't sleep much that night. After rinsing my plate and setting it in the drying rack, I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter, too restless to leave it for morning. The city outside was hushed, Charlotte in its quietest form, but inside me, something stirred. Not anger, not glee, just the sharp stillness of irony finally showing its hand. I refreshed the Stratalyze internal dashboard. The application still sat there. Unread, technically. I clicked. There it was. Her full name, Cherie Alexandria Brown. Her resume loaded in a single sleek PDF with gold text accents. Of course, the woman had a designer font for her name header. Senior Budget Lead, it read under her last role. I blinked. Lead? I remembered that job. She had taken it a year after her boutique line tanked. It was a quiet pivot. No grand announcements that time. Just a LinkedIn update and a few vague captions about joining the corporate climb. And now here it was, spun and reworded, crafted to sound like she'd carried the department on her back, managed quarterly audits across multi-million-dollar portfolios, guided financial strategy on emerging product lines, redefined internal budget structures. I had to hold back a laugh. She'd been a junior consultant. I knew that because I had once fixed her broken Excel sheet over Thanksgiving break. She'd asked me to help, over pie. Just make it work, she'd said, waving her fork like a wand. You're good at this boring stuff. That memory hit harder than expected. I didn't feel rage. I felt tired. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of the stories she told to make herself larger. And now, the joke had folded in on itself, because her oversized resume had landed squarely in my review queue. A different version of me might have flagged the application, maybe even rejected it outright. But that's not who I am. That's never been who I am. I scrolled back to the top and clicked, Advance to next round. A confirmation flashed, application forwarded. Let's see who she is, without the spotlight. I closed my laptop, the weight of the screen settling like punctuation. But sleep still wouldn't come. I walked over to the window, arms folded. The skyline blinked softly in the distance, uptown towers glowing like coated lanterns. And just like that, I was 15 again. It was sophomore year. Our school hosted a spring showcase. Cherie had signed up for a dramatic monologue, something loud and sweeping from a Broadway show I can't remember now. I had quietly submitted a project to the science fair on the same day. Something about thermal conductivity in metals. At the end of the night, Mom brought roses. She gave them to Cherie, who was still in her stage makeup, basking in applause. I think she's really got something, Mom had whispered to Dad. No one asked about my project. I packed it back into its box myself. That's how it always was. And now, the same girl who once whispered, "You'd be nothing without a screen in front of you," was applying to work behind mine. I turned back from the window and opened Slack. A message from Derek, my co-founder, sat at the top. Hey, just saw a Brown on the applicant list. Any relation? I typed slowly. Older sister. Doesn't know I'm here. He replied with a single ellipsis. Then, want me to pull it? I stared at the screen, then typed, no, let's see what happens. Later that morning, sunlight started bleeding through the blinds. I made a pot of coffee, fed the cat, and tried to move on. But the buzz wouldn't leave me. I wasn't just reviewing a resume. I was watching the same old game try to play itself in a new arena, one where I held the whistle. And I was curious, more than I wanted to admit, how Cherie would navigate a space where no one knew her name, no one worshipped her wardrobe, and no one clapped on cue. This wouldn't be her stage. It would be her test. By the time Monday rolled around, the air inside the Stradalease office felt tighter than usual. Not tense exactly, just expectant. The kind of atmosphere where something is about to happen, but no one can quite name it yet. From my home office, I opened the internal system dashboard and navigated to the building's live feed. The security camera in the main lobby gave me a clear view of the entrance. Then, right on cue, there she was, Cherie. She stepped through the glass doors with the kind of confidence only someone oblivious could carry. A light camel blazer, heels too high for comfort, hair pulled back to reveal statement earrings. She shook the receptionist's hand with a grin like she was at a networking gala. "Hi, Cherie Brown. I'm starting today." She beamed, like it was her stage debut. She hadn't changed a bit. "Still performing for applause," I murmured under my breath as I sipped lukewarm coffee. She walked down the hallway, already cracking a joke to one of the junior analysts passing by. I watched her disappear from view, into the belly of a company she knew nothing about, yet already acted like she owned. 24 hours earlier, I'd sat at the same screen with a very different kind of energy. My hand hovered over the digital approval form for new hires. Her name was there, top of the list. The HR coordinator had flagged her for fast onboarding. I clicked Approve. Under the admin notes, I quietly routed her to the finance division, under a director I trusted, someone firm but discreet. I also added an encrypted tag, EK Oversight. It gave me access to every submission she'd make without her knowing. I wasn't going to interfere. Not yet. But I wasn't going to let her roam unchecked either. She won't see me, I'd thought to myself. Not unless I want her to. Now, as I watched her settle into her desk on camera, I leaned back in my chair. My apartment still smelled like burnt toast from breakfast, and my inbox was already filling with team updates. But I couldn't look away. Later that day, around lunchtime, I caught a low murmur from the staff chat, the kind that didn't use names, just hints, a screenshot, a vague question. Then someone dropped it directly into the internal break room thread. "Hey, anyone ever seen the other co-founder?" Responses came fast. "Nope, thought it was just Derek. I heard she works remotely, or maybe she's like a ghost founder? Does she even exist?" Then came a sentence that hung there like smoke. "If she's real, why hide? That's sketchy as hell." The message was from Cherie's handle. I stared at it, blinking. So, she was already poking at the curtain. That didn't take long. The thing is, there was no rule saying I had to be visible. Derek and I had built Stradalease on a shared vision, transparency for clients, privacy for founders. I wrote the code. He shook the hands. That had always been the deal. Still, her words felt personal. Not because she doubted my presence, but because the tone hadn't changed. Even when she didn't know who she was talking about, the judgment was automatic. I let the thread die out on its own. Later in the afternoon, Cherie accessed her onboarding documents. She was assigned a budget review for Q1 adjustments, a routine task, nothing high stakes. But in the system logs, I noticed something odd. She kept opening files that weren't part of her assignment. She'd opened the legacy financial approval trail. And she'd paused on one file for 5 full minutes. The signature at the bottom, E. Kaczmarek. That signature was on almost every strategic financial directive, staff changes, equipment rollouts, contract approvals. But E. Kaczmarek didn't exist on the public org chart, not under current staff, not under the board. She was digging. In her system log, she ran a name search. No matches. I could almost hear her whispering, "So, who's running this place?" As night crept in and the building emptied out, I turned off the feed. But the image of her, eyes narrowed at her screen, mind racing, stayed with me. I had seen that look before, usually in a mirror. Back then, she was the star and I was the shadow. The girl behind the science fair project no one clapped for. The one who always had the answer but was never asked the question. And now, the roles were shifting. I should have known she'd come looking for answers, in the one place I didn't expect. After a long Tuesday of back-to-back virtual check-ins, I found myself still restless well past 9 p.m., the kind of restlessness that didn't come from caffeine or a missed meal, but from tension. A familiar, pressing discomfort. Like something was off, just out of sight, but very much in motion. So instead of heading to bed, I grabbed my keys, pulled on a zip-up hoodie over my joggers, and drove to the office. The building was mostly dark when I arrived, just a few emergency lights casting long, sterile shadows in the hallway. I didn't bother using the front entrance. I had clearance for the rear access elevator, the one that led straight to the basement level, the server room. That was my safe place. There's something meditative about humming machines, the gentle whir of processors at work. The chaos of the world couldn't survive in that silence. I swiped my badge, entered the secure PIN, and let the steel door click shut behind me. The room pulsed softly with quiet energy, lines of blue and green light blinking in steady rhythms. I dropped my bag on the floor and moved toward the central terminal. This wasn't just about peace of mind tonight. I opened our audit logs and began scanning employee data transfers. Nothing dramatic, just routine checks. Then a folder pinged yellow in the logs, flagged for external access. That wasn't typical. I expanded the log. The access ID belonged to Cherie. And the document? A Q2 budget draft, still in review, not finalized. I clicked further. She'd sent it to a personal Gmail. My stomach tightened, not from betrayal, but from something else. Predictability. There was no evidence of malicious intent. She hadn't forwarded it to a competitor or leaked it. Maybe she just wanted to study it more. Maybe she thought she'd impress someone by referencing internal projections in a meeting. But it didn't matter. It was against policy. And she knew better. "Still trying to shortcut your way in," I muttered, bookmarking the violation. I didn't act, not yet, but the line was getting thinner. I stood, stretching my arms, and moved to the opposite side of the server rack. The cool air brushed my skin, grounding me. I checked the backup mirror to ensure I was alone. I always checked, even though I'd never seen anyone here after hours. Until now. The echo of fast, deliberate footsteps snapped through the silence. I froze. The only person who would be down here this late was me, unless someone else had decided to go poking around. The door creaked. Heels, not sneakers, not boots. Heels. I stepped out from behind the rack just as Cherie stopped dead in her tracks at the doorway. Her breath hitched when she saw me. "What are you doing down here?" she asked sharply. Not surprised, suspicious. I didn't flinch. "Guess I have special access," I said calmly. Her eyes scanned the room, flicked toward the terminal behind me, then back to my face. She tried to compose herself, but I could tell her brain was already racing. "That doesn't answer my question." "You're not in a position to ask one." Her posture straightened, but before she could speak again, another voice rang out from the hallway. "Marlene, got a minute?" It was Derek holding a slim folder. He stepped inside casually, flipping open the cover. "Need your signature on the vendor pricing model." I reached for the folder without breaking eye contact with Cherie. She didn't move, just watched, like a curtain had finally been pulled and she wasn't sure what stage she was standing on anymore. Derek glanced between us. "You two met yet?" "No," I said flatly. Cherie didn't answer. I took the folder, signed on the last page, and handed it back. "Thanks," Derek nodded. "Take your time. I'll be upstairs." He left without another word. The door clicked shut again. Silence. Cherie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She stood there, eyes bouncing from the terminal to me, to the air between us that now felt impossibly charged. For the first time in our lives, she didn't look like my older sister. She looked like someone who'd been outplayed and didn't know when it happened. I didn't say anything else, just walked past her, bag slung over my shoulder. She turned to follow me with her eyes but didn't move. Let the doubt grow. It says more than I ever could. The next time I saw her outside of work was Saturday morning, at the same sun-washed corner table we'd gathered around since childhood. It was a brunch Claudine had insisted on, said she missed seeing us all together. I'd hesitated, but eventually gave in. Some routines, even the uncomfortable ones, still had a place in the family fabric. The cafe smelled like cinnamon waffles and brewed espresso. Cherie had already arrived, perched at the center of the table, loud and animated as usual, waving her mimosa like it was an accessory. She tossed around office lingo she'd barely begun to understand. Budget reallocation, strategic pivot, revenue forecast accuracy, strung together like pearls on a necklace she hadn't earned. Across the table, our Uncle Wendell chuckled mid-bite and leaned toward me. "You two working in the same place and not even talking about it? What are you, corporate spies now?" I smiled faintly but said nothing. Cherie laughed harder than necessary, flicking her hair over one shoulder. "Come on, Uncle W. It's not like I report to anyone important." I lowered my eyes to the steam curling from my coffee. She didn't know just how wrong she was. Later that weekend, I reviewed the quarterly prep deck from our finance team. Monday morning's internal sync was going to be a big one. I wasn't supposed to be in that meeting, not formally, but as head of infrastructure strategy, my signature was on every line item being discussed, so I decided to sit in. The meeting began like any other, projectors humming, people filing in, the sound of chairs scraping tile. Cherie walked in confidently with a click of her heels and set her laptop down at the head of the conference table. She began her portion of the presentation, Q3 projection overview, reading from her slides like she had practiced. Confident, articulate. For a moment, I almost thought she had it down. Then I saw the numbers. The revenue projection was off by a wide margin, not a rounding error, a full $180,000 discrepancy. I raised my hand. The room quieted. All eyes turned to me, some surprised I was even present. "That revenue line," I said evenly, "doesn't align with the pipeline inputs. We've been pulling from a new model since June." Cherie blinked, visibly caught off guard. It was based on the July forecast." "That version was deprecated," I said. "Check the access logs. The updated model is clearly time-stamped." She tried to pivot. "Well, I thought it was more accurate to show both versions." "But you didn't. You only showed the outdated one. That creates risk." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the AC unit. Her face turned a shade paler. Our director nodded. "We'll need that fixed before end of day. Good catch, Marlene." I said nothing more. I didn't enjoy the moment, but I didn't shrink from it either. As the meeting dispersed, I caught a glimpse of Cherie, still seated, her fingers motionless above her keyboard. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She looked cornered. That afternoon, I reviewed anonymous submissions for our internal innovation grant program. We'd recently launched it to encourage fresh ideas from all levels, regardless of title or tenure. One proposal stood out: tight structure, sharp financial logic, fresh angle on integrating team training into budget forecasting. It was easily the strongest of the batch. I marked it for immediate approval. 2 days later, HR pinged me to schedule a follow-up with the author. The name? Cherie Brown. I stared at the screen, lips parting just slightly. "Huh," I muttered. "Maybe there's more to her than I thought." Around the office, I started noticing subtle shifts. People no longer grouped her in the new hire category. They listened more carefully when she spoke. She wasn't exactly embraced, but she wasn't dismissed either. And Cherie? She no longer lingered in the break room like it was a stage. She came early, left late, talked less, observed more. I didn't approach her, not yet. But I watched, quietly, not out of judgment, but out of curiosity. Maybe this wasn't just a performance after all. Maybe something was changing. Then came the day she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. It started with a ping. A quiet alert on my desktop just after 8:13 p.m. I was finishing up my notes for an investor call the next morning when the compliance system flagged a red item. Restricted document sent to external contact. At first, I thought it might be a misclassification. Our system sometimes caught false positives, new vendors, third-party consultants. But when I opened the report and traced the access path, the sender's name stopped me cold. Cherie. I stared at the entry, her company email address, time-stamped, logged, the document in question, a preliminary proposal containing sensitive financial forecasts tied to a pitch for one of our most high-value clients. And the recipient? A third-party vendor, not yet under NDA. Someone she'd been coordinating with for visual materials, probably trying to make her presentation more slick. My chest tightened. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't some innocent misstep like using the wrong spreadsheet in a rush. This was careless, arrogant, dangerous. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd sprinted past it, eyes closed, with no sense of consequence. I didn't react immediately. I just sat there staring at the screen, letting the reality harden in my mind. Then I stood, grabbed my phone, and walked out of the apartment. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to sting. I drove straight to the office. Derek's car was still in the lot, his light still on. He worked late as often as I did. When I knocked on his door, he looked up with that quiet concern he reserved for moments like this. "Got a sec?" I asked. He nodded and closed his laptop halfway. "Always." I stepped inside and dropped the printout onto his desk. He scanned the highlighted line, his brow furrowing halfway down the page. "She forwarded that?" he asked. I nodded. "From her company email, to an outside vendor. They haven't signed anything." He let out a low whistle and leaned back in his chair. "That's not just sloppy. That's a breach." I folded my arms. "She's crossing lines like they don't exist." "You knew this was coming," Derek said after a pause, voice even. "The only question is, how far will you let it go?" He sipped his coffee, watching me. "You've been protecting her in silence," he continued. "Maybe it's time she sees who she's really dealing with." He wasn't wrong. I had let it slide. I told myself it was to observe, to study her under pressure. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of turning into her. Afraid that doing what needed to be done would make me cruel, cold, unforgiving. But it wasn't cruelty that fueled me tonight. It was accountability. Later, back at my apartment, I sat down in the glow of my monitor and opened a new HR incident report. It asked for the subject. I typed, Sherry Brown. It asked for the incident category. I selected, Policy Violation, Confidential Data Mishandling, and in the summary section, I kept it brief. Document, FY26 Budget Forecast, Vendor Forward Without Clearance. Breach, External Sharing Prior to NDA. I attached the compliance log and clicked Forward. The to-field autofilled Derek's address. Above the message body, I wrote one sentence, no more warnings. Then I hit send. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle around me. Outside, the city pulsed like a distant heartbeat. But inside, I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret. She'd earned the fallout, and I wasn't going to catch her this time. Still, I didn't expect her to stay quiet. She came for my credibility next. The hallway was quiet, eerily so for mid-morning. Fluorescent lights hummed low above polished tile, casting dull reflections off the company's wall of founders. Most people walked by it without a second glance. But not her. Cherie had been on her way to finance, arms full of reports, phone in hand, when her stride slowed, then stopped. Her gaze locked on the glass panel that lined the far wall, elegantly etched with names, titles, and founding years. Legacy set in stone, or in this case, laser cut into tempered glass. And there it was, Marlene Kamerick, co-founder, chief technical architect, 2019. I watched it unfold from my office's camera display, a private feed only a handful of people even knew existed. I didn't need audio to read the moment on her face. Her body stilled, her chest rose with a sharp inhale, and her shoulders pulled back like she'd been slapped. She stood frozen, not blinking, not moving. The clipboard in her hand lowered slightly. She wasn't holding it anymore. She was holding realization. It took her several seconds before she stepped away. She didn't go into finance. She didn't even check her phone. She just walked. Later that afternoon, as the office buzzed with its usual low hum, keyboard taps, soft laughter, printer whirs, I saw Cherie again in the employee lounge. She was standing by the coffee machine when Samira, one of our newer analysts, walked up holding a sandwich. "Oh my God," Samira gushed. "Are you the one who's close to Marlene?" Cherie blinked. "Excuse me?" "You know, like, close. We all figured. I mean, you're new, but you came in strong. I heard from Ops that Derek signed off on your hire personally." Cherie's expression shifted instantly. Not confusion this time. Something else, calculation. Samira continued, oblivious. "Kinda wild, right? No one's ever seen her. Some people thought she didn't even exist, but you're clearly connected." There was a beat. Cherie smiled, tight and thin. You hear a lot of things around here. Still, if you are close to her, Samira added, lowering her voice slightly, some folks think you might be next in line for leadership. You know, if anything changes. I paused the feed right there. Even through the distance of a lens, I could feel it. Cherie wasn't just absorbing the rumor. She was deciding whether to wear it like armor or use it like a blade. It didn't take long to find out which. By 4:15 that same day, she stormed into HR. I wasn't in the building, but the call came through immediately from Lila at the front desk. Marlene, she's here. She wants to know who's been touching her financial reports. Did anyone tell her? She demanded access logs. She says someone's been undermining her role. And did you give her the names? She saw yours. We didn't hide anything. She looked upset. Good, I said softly. She should be. Later that evening, I watched the surveillance recording. Cherie at the HR counter, her voice rising, hands braced hard against the desk, face flushed with something more volatile than anger. Betrayal. She's been reviewing my work? She said, incredulous. My sister? I've been working under her this whole damn time? It wasn't just shock. It was a slow, humiliating unraveling. She turned abruptly and walked out, not toward the elevator, not toward her desk. She needed air, maybe space, maybe time. But what she needed didn't matter anymore. I sat at my console, watching the footage rewind, then play again, slower this time. Not because I wanted to savor it. I wasn't gloating. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was closure. And maybe just a little justice. It had never been about hiding from her. Not really. It was about seeing what she'd become when she thought I wasn't watching. It was about proving, to both of us, that identity doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs truth. And when the truth came out, she didn't fold. She fought back, hard. The invitation came 2 weeks earlier, slipped into my inbox between performance reviews and code deployment approvals. A clean corporate header, an elegant serif font. Stradley's 5-year anniversary celebration, executive recognition ceremony. I hovered over the RSVP for a full day before clicking yes. Not because I needed the attention, but because I finally stopped hiding. The day arrived with Carolina blue skies and air heavy with summer. The company's 10th floor was transformed. Linen-covered tables, champagne flutes, the scent of catered hors d'oeuvres wafting through the lobby. I wore black, tailored, structured, calm, a reminder that I was never just a technician in a hoodie. Derek took the mic near the end of the program. He spoke about growth, resilience, and innovation, pausing with a glance toward me. And now, he said, I want to introduce the real mind behind our tech, the one who's been shaping this company from behind the curtain, a quiet force, a brilliant one. He turned, arm outstretched. Marlene Kaczmarek. Applause, hesitant at first, then growing, row by row, like a wave finding momentum. I stepped onto the stage. Across the room I saw her, my mother, Claudine. Her eyes blinked rapidly as if adjusting focus. Next to her, Wendell's expression twitched somewhere between disbelief and embarrassment. Cherie wasn't in the crowd. Not yet. But she'd hear. I spoke briefly. No theatrics, just acknowledgement of the team, of our journey, of the code that had become something more than syntax. It became structure. When I stepped off the stage, the room buzzed with questions. Some eyes followed me like they'd just learned a secret, some like they'd just solved a riddle. In the hallway outside the ballroom, Claudine caught up to me, her heels tapped nervously against the tile. Why didn't you tell us? I turned to her. Would it have changed how you saw me? There was no defense in her face, no sharpness, just something softer. She nodded once, small, but enough. Wendell wandered over next, tugging at his collar. Didn't think coding could build an empire, I smiled. Didn't think silence could say so much either. He chuckled, uncertain. Then left. That evening, long after the lights dimmed and the crowd dissipated, I returned to my office. The space was dimly lit, calm. I powered on my screen. Notifications blinked. One stood out. Quarterly forecast adjusted per your comments. Thanks for the correction. S. Brown. No emojis, no fluff, just plain text. But it was the first time she'd ever acknowledged an error, No deflection, no sarcasm, just responsibility. Attached was a revised forecast, every line double-checked, no rounding slips, no padded assumptions. It was solid. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled beneath my chin. Something had shifted, not loudly, quietly. I closed my laptop and stepped out onto the rooftop. The air was cooler up there, softer. The city stretched beneath me, glowing like static fire. And then I saw her. Cherie stood at the far edge, hands resting on the railing. She didn't turn when I approached. "You win," she said. "It wasn't a game." A pause, then her voice lower. "I wasn't trying to be better than you, I just wanted to be seen." I moved beside her. "Well, now they see me, loud and clear." She turned. For once no smirk, no raised brow, just eyes, tired maybe, but clear. There wasn't a hug. There wasn't forgiveness spelled out in warm, sweeping dialogue, but there was acknowledgement, a shared silence, and sometimes that's all there is. And sometimes that's enough. Still, as I stood beside her, city humming beneath us, wind catching the edges of her blazer, I knew something else too. Respect doesn't erase wounds, and healing doesn't always come with closure. Monday morning carried that same quiet tension it always did, the kind of low buzz that hinted things were about to move, just not yet. My inbox was already stacked, notifications popping up like popcorn, meetings, deadlines, flagged emails, another packed day. Then one notification stood out. New CSR proposals submitted, review pending approval. I clicked it without much thought. But this one didn't land like the others. Touch the screen, touch the future. A mentorship program for young women in underrepresented tech communities. It was a solid concept. Clean, grounded, long-term. But it wasn't the idea that got me. It was the author, Cherie Brown. I paused, read it again. Then my eyes dropped to the last line, tucked into the margin almost like an afterthought. Inspired by the quiet mission of Marlene Kaczmarek. That stopped me cold. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. Not a tribute, not a plea, just a nod. A quiet recognition. Like someone saying, "I saw what you did," even when no one else did. I sat back, staring at the screen. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a mirror held up to something I'd long put away. Not for closure, just for distance. I approved it. Not out of obligation or emotion. It was simply good, strategic, grounded, worth doing. 2 days later, the quarterly review brought us all into the boardroom. Fluorescent lights, sterile walls, that stale air of long meetings. Derek sat beside me, impassive. Cherie was 3 seats down, notebook open, focused. No theater, no flash. Wendell, newly semi-retired but still clinging to authority like a second skin, flipped through the CSR packets with a smirk. Then he said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. Bit much giving credit to someone who doesn't even like the spotlight, no? The room hushed. Not dramatic, just still. Cherie looked up, calm. "Actually," she said, "some of the most powerful people I know say the least, and do the most." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. The weight was in the restraint. No one responded. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full. A kind of shift you could feel more than name. I didn't jump in. Didn't need to. She didn't look at me, but there was a glance, indirect but clear. Not a request. Not even a connection. Just alignment. Like she wasn't covering me, but standing beside the truth. The week blurred forward. Tasks, calls, the usual chaos. Then Sunday came again. Family brunch, same cafe, same wobbly table, same plastic-coated menus from a decade ago. I walked in late. Cherie was already there, dressed down, flats, denim, hair tucked behind one ear. A mimosa at her side, her notebook half open. This wasn't work mode. This was just her. The small talk dragged. Gas prices, weather, election rumors. I kept quiet, chewing slowly. Then Wendell lowered his paper and asked, "You still doing that freelance data thing?" Before I could answer, Cherie cut in. "Uncle, she runs the company I now work for. The one whose tools you use to file your taxes." Flat, factual. Forks paused midair. No one knew where to look. Then Claudine, always quiet, reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Just a touch. No words, no performative grace, And somehow, that was enough. That night I walked home, letting the breeze carry the weight of the day. The mural on Davidson Street came into view, faces painted across brick, voices of the past frozen in color. I stopped. I didn't feel triumphant. Or bitter. But I didn't feel invisible anymore either. Maybe justice isn't about getting the last word. Maybe it's about not needing to. Maybe healing doesn't come with big declarations. Maybe it's the small shifts, the way someone who once talked over you starts listening. At the corner, I whispered, to myself, to the night. We don't have to go back to being sisters the way we were. A pause. But at least now she sees me, and that's a start. Sometimes the hardest place to be seen is in the spaces closest to us, the ones we call home, the families we come from, the workplaces we've helped carry on our backs. You can show up, work hard, stay loyal, and still feel invisible. For years, I chased a kind of recognition that never came. I thought if I just kept my head down, if I stayed quiet and steady, someone would notice. That my silence was a kind of strength. That dignity meant never demanding anything. Not attention, not space, not even credit. But here's what I know now. Silence without boundaries doesn't protect you. It erases you. And waiting for others to hand you your worth is a game you'll never win, because it was never theirs to give in the first place. Through my own experience, both personal and professional, I've come to understand something I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need anyone's permission to take up space. You don't need approval to be powerful. And sometimes, the boldest kind of justice isn't a confrontation. It's simply showing up as your full self, unapologetically, while the people who once overlooked you slowly realize they were wrong. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe you've made yourself small to avoid tension. Maybe you've downplayed your voice just to keep the peace. If any of that feels familiar, let this be your sign. You don't have to shrink anymore. You don't have to wait for the right moment to stand tall. Be the version of yourself they never expected, and let them catch up, because you're not too much. You're not too loud. You're not asking for too much. You're asking for exactly what you've earned: respect, recognition, and room to breathe. Now I want to turn this over to you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, or like your work and worth were overlooked in your job? What was the moment that shifted something for you? Not to prove anything to others, but to finally choose yourself. I want to hear your story. Drop a 1 in the comments if any of this hit home, or let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm always reading, and I'm always listening. And if this video gave you even the tiniest spark, even if it was just a quiet, steady yes inside your chest, hit that subscribe button. There's more coming, more stories, more truths. Because this isn't just about me anymore, it's about us. And I'm just getting started. Hi, I'm Keisha. This Thanksgiving, my mom texted me, "Thanks for existing, don't come." I'd been paying the rent, covering the Wi-Fi, even keeping the lights on. But in their story, I was just squatting, just there. Then I found fake leases in my name, a stolen credit line from when I was 17, a scholarship I never even knew I lost, because they made sure I stayed close, useful, silent. What kind of family does that? And if they could lie that easily, what else were they hiding? Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that felt like a held breath, overcast, wet, still. I had just finished brewing coffee, the kitchen filled with the quiet hiss of the machine, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up. Mom. I didn't expect warmth. Our conversations had become colder over the years. But what I read stunned me still. "Thanks for existing, don't come." That was it. No good morning, no happy Thanksgiving, just those 6 words. I stared at the message, blinking hard, half expecting it to rewrite itself into something more human, something less final. But it didn't change, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't. From the other side of the apartment, I could hear Casey laughing on FaceTime, her voice bright and easy as she dabbed on makeup in my bathroom. She was already dressed for dinner, for their dinner. I stood there with my coffee going cold in my hand, the text still glowing on the screen. I didn't reply, didn't ask why. I just swallowed it. like I had every other subtle rejection before it. This wasn't the first time I'd been left out, but it was the first time it came wrapped in a thank you card soaked in venom. 2 days earlier, while I was folding laundry, Casey had dropped a little truth bomb like it was nothing. "Oh, by the way," she'd said while checking her reflection, "I told Mom you're just kind of staying here for now, since your name's not on the lease." I remember pausing, towel in hand. "What?" She didn't even flinch. "It's not a big deal. Just makes it easier, you know. They don't need to think you're like, freeloading off me or something." "But I'm paying the rent," I said, voice flat. "Yeah," she shrugged. "Still, it's just easier this way." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like erasing me was somehow a kindness. It had been over a year since Casey moved in, promising it was just for a month or two while she figured things out. I picked up the slack, rent, groceries, electricity. I gave up my gym membership, cut back on takeout, skipped vacations, and in return, I became a background character in my own life. Growing up, it had always been like this. Casey, the golden child, the chaotic artist who just needed a little extra support. Me, the quiet one who held it together. Birthdays were forgotten, school achievements overlooked, unless they made Casey look good by association. Once in middle school, I won a local writing contest. Mom threw the certificate in the trash because she thought it was just a flyer. But when Casey got an honorable mention in a sketch competition, we went out for ice cream and Mom told the waiter like it was national news. Some patterns run so deep you stop noticing the cut. By noon, Casey had left for the family dinner. No hug, no acknowledgement of what day it was. She'd tossed on her scarf, kissed the mirror, and vanished. Her absence made the apartment quieter than usual, but not in a peaceful way. It felt hollow, like someone had taken the air with them. I reheated the turkey sandwich I made the night before, set one plate, poured a second cup of coffee, even though no one else was coming. I placed it opposite me out of habit, then laughed at myself and drank both. They were probably sitting around the big table at Mom's house by then, passing the sweet potatoes, smiling for Facebook photos. My seat, if it was ever really mine, sat empty. Again, I didn't call, didn't text, didn't beg. I've learned that sometimes silence is stronger than any explanation. Instead, I opened my notebook. On the first line, I wrote, "They don't get to define me by absence anymore." I was still there, still paying the bills, still keeping the lights on, and yet, somehow, to them, I had become invisible. Keisha? Oh, she's just squatting, just drifting, just there. Funny thing is, you start to believe it yourself. Until one morning, with a mug in your hand and a message on your phone, the lie breaks. And what shatters isn't just trust. It's the version of yourself you kept twisting to stay loved. I stayed at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. The kind of stillness settled in that doesn't comfort you, just turns up the volume on every thought you've been avoiding. I'd washed the plate, wiped down the counter, even lined up the salt and pepper shakers like some desperate bid for normalcy. But nothing touched the weight sitting in my chest. I kept staring at the phone screen. The message still glared back at me, sharp and unblinking. No follow-up, no explanation, just the digital equivalent of a door closing in your face. "Hey, Casey said you'd be busy. We'll catch up another time, okay?" It was the smiley face that did it, that smug little curve at the end of a sentence built to dismiss. A full stop disguised as friendliness. It confirmed something I'd been sidestepping for a long time. Years, maybe. A nagging sense that something wasn't right. Not just this year, not just this holiday, but something deeper, something rotten under the floorboards of our family dynamic. I didn't want to believe it, but here it was. Simple, casual, neatly phrased. By early afternoon, the clouds had folded over the city, dimming everything into a dull gray. The apartment was silent again. Casey was gone, probably already charming her way through mashed potatoes and half glasses of wine, the golden child with perfect timing and a short memory. And me? I was here, alone in the silence I hadn't chosen but had somehow inherited. I opened my laptop, not to scroll or distract myself, but because I needed something concrete. Something I could point to and say, "See, I'm not crazy." Proof that what I was feeling had roots, that I wasn't just overreacting or stuck in some bitter loop. It started slow. A half-hearted scroll through my email. Nothing exciting. Overdue notices, sale announcements, automated reminders from apps I barely used. Then, tucked between a PayPal receipt and a Spotify promo, I saw it. A Venmo notification I didn't recognize. $45 to K. Todd. Memo. Groceries for us. That's what it said, emojis and all. But I don't use emojis like that, not when money's involved, and I definitely didn't send it. I opened the Venmo app and scrolled through the history. More transactions popped up, not from me, these were from my mother's account. A trail of payments, each tagged with chirpy memos and emoji hearts. Payments I'd never heard about, never seen mentioned. $80, gas and Wi-Fi, $32, split the Uber, and they all went to the same recipient, K. Todd. The name itched at the back of my mind, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. I tapped on the profile. No photo, just a blank face and a username I couldn't ignore. K. Todd. Todd. Todd was Casey's ex, the same guy who ghosted her a decade ago after stringing her along for 2 years. He'd vanished, at least that's what we were told. But his name had never fully disappeared. Every once in a while it would pop up again in odd places, as a saved password hint, as a leftover profile on our shared Hulu account. It became a running joke. Todd, the digital ghost. But it wasn't funny anymore, because Casey had used that name before, when she didn't want things traced back to her. And now, here it was again, attached to our mother's money. And I was supposed to believe this was all just coincidence? No way. A new clarity hit me, sharp and unwanted. 2 months ago, Casey hadn't asked me to spot her rent like she usually did. No desperate texts, no explanations. I'd assumed she got a freelance gig. She said she did. I was even proud of her, believing she was finally standing on her own. But I knew better now. She didn't need help that month, because she already had it, from Mom. Funneled through a name that didn't belong to either of them. A system built on omission and old tricks. And I was the idiot holding the safety net. I logged into my bank account, heart thudding, scanned the history. The rent I paid landed on the 2nd of the month. The transfer from Mom to K. Todd? The first. Not a coincidence. Not even close. It was a cover. I leaned back from the screen, blood buzzing in my ears. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a missed conversation. This was a structure. One where Casey played the helpless artist, charming and full of stories, and I, steady, responsible, carried the weight without question. I was the backup generator they never acknowledged, just running in the background, quietly keeping the lights on. And now, I wasn't just excluded from Thanksgiving dinner. I was being phased out of the truth entirely. The part that hurt the most wasn't the money. It was how easy it was for them, how naturally they edited me out. As if I took up space they'd rather save for someone more palatable. I started printing. Every statement, every receipt. I took screenshots, created folders, named them with clinical precision. Rent transfers, cross-check, Venmo history, Mom to K. Todd, Casey payment overlap. My hands didn't tremble. I wasn't panicking. I was archiving. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I needed the record. I needed to see it in black and white, to confirm that the ache in my gut had a name. Somewhere around the 4th printout, I whispered something I hadn't even realized I was thinking. If they want to pretend I don't exist, let's see what else they've erased. I paused. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I glanced back at the screen, clicked through old folders, backups from years ago, files I hadn't opened since college. Somewhere deep in the labyrinth of outdated hard drive copies, I saw a PDF I didn't recognize. First credit line, 2009.pdf. That's when I found it. And I knew I wasn't done digging, not by a long shot. By the time sunlight finally broke through the blinds the next morning, the kitchen table looked nothing like the quiet, harmless space it used to be. It had transformed into something between a war zone and an archive. Paper was everywhere, some crumpled, others neatly stacked, most of it stained with circles from last night's coffee mug. Receipts, statements, screen grabs, and hand-scribbled notes sprawled across the surface like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I'd been solving. In the middle of the chaos, like the glowing center of some investigation board, sat my laptop, still open, still lit, still waiting. I hadn't really slept. Maybe 3 hours, curled up sideways on the couch, a too-thin throw blanket failing to cover my feet. My neck ached, my eyes burned, my spine was one big knot, but my brain wouldn't shut off. The hum of the refrigerator was the only consistent sound through the night, aside from the occasional rustle of a paper I accidentally nudged with my foot or elbow. I never touched the pie I bought for myself. Pumpkin, from the overpriced bakery on 6th. It sat in the fridge, untouched, still wrapped in its bakery box like it was waiting for some celebration that never came. It felt like a bad joke now, like I was the only one who didn't know Thanksgiving had been canceled for me. My cursor hovered over the file that started it all. First credit line, 2009.pdf. I clicked. It opened to a dull official-looking form. Retail store branding faded and off-center, like it had been scanned 1,000 times. My full name was printed at the top of the page in clean, almost mechanical handwriting. Address filled in, phone number, social security number, everything lined up. Except one thing. I didn't fill this out. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was neater, older, more careful than I had ever been at 17. And when I scrolled to the bottom, I stopped breathing for a second. The signature was supposed to be mine. It even looked close. But it tilted too far to the right. And the loop in the S of Keisha curled upward, not downward. The same way my mother used to sign every permission slip, every sick note, every check she ever wrote. And just like that, it came back. Senior year. One Friday afternoon, I was rushing out the door to catch the bus. Backpack unzipped, hair still damp from a rushed shower. Mom stopped me at the kitchen counter, slipping a blank form on top of my geometry notebook. "Sign this real quick," she said. "It's for the field trip form I forgot to turn in." No hesitation, I signed. Of course I did. She was my mom. I didn't even read it. Turns out it wasn't for a field trip. It was for this. A store credit account, opened in my name, using my information, with her address. And the kicker? She never paid it. Not once. My eyes stung as I scanned through the document again. Account activity, missed payments, fees, closure, balance charged off. The debt had lived quietly in the background of my life for years, sabotaging things without making a sound. When I was 20, I tried to rent my first off-campus apartment. I had saved, budgeted, even found a roommate on Craigslist I didn't totally hate. The leasing office pulled my credit and the woman behind the desk gave me that look. Sympathetic, but firm. "You might want to check your credit," she said carefully. "It's not great." I remember the heat crawling up my face as I nodded, thanked her, and walked out, blinking back tears. I thought I'd made some terrible mistake, that I'd done something wrong. Maybe I forgot to pay something. Maybe I applied for something and didn't understand how it worked. But I never missed a payment, because I never had anything to pay. It wasn't me, it was her, and she never told me. Not even when I cried on the phone about getting denied for my first credit card. Not when I panicked over the interest rates on student loans. Not once did she step in, sit me down, and admit what she'd done. She just let me carry the blame. I scrolled through the rest of the file. It felt like watching someone take an eraser to the margins of my life. Not big, obvious moments, just small, crucial chances, credit lines, approval letters, a future slowly strangled before it even had air. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was identity theft. From my own mother. My body went still. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I sat with my arms wrapped around myself like I had to physically keep my ribcage from caving in. Like holding still was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It wasn't just about money or credit scores. It was about opportunity, about what she took from me before I even had a chance to defend it. Years of confusion, self-blame, missed milestones, all of it traced back to a single forged signature. I thought about every no I'd ever gotten that didn't make sense, every job that wanted a credit check, every bank that rejected my application, every landlord who smiled and said, "Sorry, nothing we can do." And I thought it was my fault. It was never my fault. It was her. That morning, something in me changed. The grief hardened into something sharper. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was focused. I wasn't crying. I was cataloging. I pulled up everything I could. Emails, PDFs, screenshots, bank letters. I started connecting dots, tracing timelines, finding patterns. I created folders with names like 2009 fraud, credit trail mom, suspicious transfers. I wasn't just surviving now. I was investigating. Because if she did this once, what else had she done? How far did it go? I opened a folder I had saved for tax season, something boring I hadn't looked at in over a year. It was labeled Housing Docs 2021, just a backup in case I ever needed to reprint my lease agreement. I clicked it open, expecting utility bills or scanned copies of my rental history. Instead, I found a PDF, a lease agreement, my apartment, my address, but the leaseholder? Casey, not me. Her name was on the lease. She'd been living here too, sure, but the primary tenant was her. I felt the ground tilt. If my name wasn't even on the lease, what else had they done behind my back? What else had they taken? And just like that, the case got bigger. I didn't wait. I couldn't. There are moments when hesitation feels like surrender, and I wasn't in the mood to lose anything else. By 9:10 a.m. on Saturday, I was already parked outside the leasing office downtown, engine off, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat beside me, like a quiet co-pilot, thick with everything I'd printed the night before, copies of lease documents, financial statements, emails, annotated screenshots, a list of names and dates I couldn't forget even if I wanted to. My body felt wired but heavy, like my nerves were stuck in high gear and my bones were filled with cement. I took one breath, then another, then I grabbed the folder and got out of the car. The building was everything I expected and somehow worse. Beige walls that had once tried to pass for warm neutral, an outdated reception desk with fake potted plants, and piped-in top 40 hits from the early 2000s humming softly through the ceiling speakers. The scent of industrial carpet cleaner clung to the air like it didn't want to leave. A woman behind the desk greeted me without lifting her eyes from her monitor. "Hi there. What can I help you with today?" I kept my voice steady, measured. "I need a copy of the current lease agreement for my apartment at Chestnut Grove, Unit 3B. She nodded absently and started typing. "Sure, just need your name for the file?" "Keisha Todd." And just like that, her hands paused mid-keystroke. Not dramatically, just a quiet freeze, like her system had returned something unexpected. She looked at the screen, then up at me with a smile that tightened around the edges. "I'm sorry," she said, tone suddenly a little too careful, "but the leaseholder on file for that unit is Casey Todd, since March." For a moment, everything inside me went still. My heart didn't race, my stomach didn't drop. It hardened. "That's not right," I said slowly. "I signed the original lease 3 years ago. I've renewed it every year. I pay the rent. I handle the maintenance requests. I live there, not her." The woman glanced toward a door down the hallway. "Would you like to speak with the property manager?" 5 minutes later, I was seated across from a man named Greg, mid-30s if that, the kind of guy who wore a blazer to look older, but still gave off the vibe of someone who coached JV soccer on weekends. He offered a practiced smile and printed a thick packet from the desktop behind his desk. "Let's see what we've got," he said, flipping through the pages. "Original lease, signed in August 2020. You're listed as primary, yes. But the most recent renewal in March of this year, that was submitted under Casey Todd's name." He slid the packet toward me. I opened it. Page by page, it was like watching myself be erased. There on page 2, my name, printed and then crossed out in black ink. Below it, Casey's name, written in bubbly cursive like a teenager signing a yearbook. And then, stapled to the last page, a notarized affidavit. From my mother. Confirming Casey as the rightful leaseholder and resident, citing mail routing complications and shared familial access. I stared at the signature, her loopy handwriting unmistakable. Notarized and stamped, dated 3 days after I left town for work in February. She said she'd drop off the renewal for me, I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. Said she'd make sure it got there while I was in Dayton. Greg raised his eyebrows. You didn't deliver it personally? No, I was at a hospital training for work. 4 days. She said she'd handle it. My voice sounded flat, unfamiliar. The envelope was sealed, labeled. I left it on the table. They must have swapped it, altered it, replaced it with this. I handed it over willingly. They didn't steal it. I gave them the opportunity, and they took it. Greg leaned forward slightly, brow furrowed. So, to be clear, you never signed this renewal? No, I said. I didn't even see that version of the lease until right now. He nodded slowly. Okay, I'll make a note of that in your file. But, he hesitated. It was notarized. That's going to complicate things legally. I let the words settle, and then I said quietly but without apology, it was notarized by my mother, the same woman who told me not to come to Thanksgiving this year because I make things complicated. Greg didn't have anything to say to that. He just nodded again, slowly, like someone who wanted to look understanding without getting involved. I left the office with 3 printed copies of the lease, a copy of the notarized affidavit, and a verbal agreement that all future correspondence regarding the unit would be sent to both my name and Casey's, regardless of who was listed as leaseholder. It wasn't justice, but it was a paper trail. Back home, I scanned every page, uploaded them to a new encrypted drive, backed it up to the cloud, backed it up again to a portable hard drive I hadn't touched since senior year of college. This wasn't about being paranoid. This was about protection. This was my shield. And maybe, just maybe, it was also the start of something more. That night, I cleared the kitchen table again, moved the stacks of documents with care, not chaos. This time, I wasn't just reacting, I was building something. I grabbed a lined notepad, opened it to a blank page, and pressed a bright yellow sticky note right in the center. In all caps, I wrote, "Don't test me again." I underlined it twice. Then I began a new list. Names, dates, transactions, logins I didn't recognize, bills I never paid but somehow affected me. Every quiet betrayal, every moment I'd been made invisible on paper, I wrote down in ink. Because if they were going to lie with documents and signatures and notaries, I was going to answer with records. And this time, I was keeping score. I didn't even make it through Sunday breakfast before the next punch landed. A letter slid through the mail slot around 11:20 a.m., while I was pouring coffee and folding the dish towel back over the oven handle. I heard the soft thunk on the floor and thought it was another coupon booklet, until I saw the logo in the corner. Capital One. I hadn't opened any new account. I hadn't applied for anything. Not recently. Not ever, under that name. Still, I tore the envelope open, steam rising from my untouched mug. "Welcome to your new card member experience," the letter read. "New account approval. Limit, $3,000. Card ending in 9812. Billing address, my apartment. Application date, November 8th. My pulse thudded behind my teeth. That was 2 weeks ago. I had no memory of doing this. None. I called the number printed in bold red near the bottom. The customer rep picked up after 3 rings. "Hi, thank you for calling Capital One. Can I verify your name and the last 4 digits of your social?" I did. She pulled up the record. "Looks like this account was approved online. Application submitted under Keisha Todd. Same birth date. Email registered is keys.todd, 21@gmail. I don't have a Gmail with that handle. I asked, "Where was the card mailed?" "Same as billing, your address." That's when the nausea started to settle in. "And there have already been transactions," she added. "Sephora, DoorDash, Apple Store, and an online boutique called LuxSpark." I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. Casey. She'd done it again. I pulled up my email and searched for the Gmail variation. It had been listed as a recovery option for an old Yahoo account I never used anymore, probably added years ago, during one of the times I let her borrow my laptop. The pieces fit too easily. The charges? All things she'd casually mentioned receiving as gifts last week. "Oh my God, I won this makeup set," she'd said, holding up a box. "People online are so generous sometimes." No, people like me were just easy to steal from. At 4 p.m. I stepped outside, walked aimlessly down Broad Street, cold air biting my fingertips. Downtown was already lit for the holidays. Silver garlands strung between traffic lights, store windows sparkling with fake snow and false cheer. I wasn't angry, not in the firestorm way. I was a glacier, cold, immovable, rising. By the time the sun began to dip behind the old courthouse, I was back in my apartment. Casey's boots were by the door, brand new, glossy, black with a gold zipper up the side. She was in the living room, scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. I walked to the kitchen table, sat down, opened the folder I'd updated the night before, and waited. She didn't look up. "You used my name," I said flatly. "My social, my credit." She blinked, looked over her shoulder. "Are you seriously still on that?" I confirmed it. "I spoke with Capital One this morning." She scoffed. "You're so dramatic. You act like the world's ending every time someone borrows your stapler." I didn't flinch. "This isn't borrowing, it's federal." "Oh, please." She rolled her eyes. "You always play the victim. Maybe now you'll stop acting so perfect." I stood. "This is your last warning," I said calmly. "You contact the card company. You cancel the account, you pay it off, or the next conversation we have will be with a police report between us." She laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, thin around the edges. "You wouldn't dare." I didn't respond. I just walked into my bedroom, shut the door, and opened my laptop. The identitytheft.gov portal glowed bright in the dark. By midnight, the report was submitted, the screenshots uploaded, the statement signed. I didn't shake. I didn't second guess. At 12:03 a.m., I stood in front of the mirror, placed a new sticky note next to the one from yesterday. Silence isn't grace, it's permission. Not anymore. By Monday morning, I thought I had seen the worst of it, but violations have layers, and Casey wasn't finished. I was rinsing out my coffee mug when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said answer it. "Is this Miss Keisha Todd?" a male voice asked, too formal to be friendly. "Yes. This is Daniel from Coastal Recovery Group. We're calling to confirm the repayment terms of your recent $2,000 payday loan with Quickstream Financial." I didn't take out a payday loan. There was a pause. I could hear keyboard clacking. Then, "It was processed under your name and social security number on November 15th. Funds were deposited to a Chime account. The address listed matches your current residence." My grip tightened around the sink edge. "I need documentation." "Certainly. We'll send a full digital copy of the application and transaction log to the email on file." Which is keys.todd.21@gmail.com. "Of course. Send it to this one," I said, spelling out my actual address. My voice was calm, controlled. By noon, the file arrived. There it was. My name, my SSN, my address, and a signature that tried to mimic mine, but didn't even come close. It was Casey's looped T that gave her away. I forwarded everything to the officer handling my ID theft report and headed to the station that same afternoon. It was cloudy, a wind picking up that threatened to bite through my sweater. The inside of the precinct felt more like a DMV than a place where lives could be repaired. Fluorescent lights, cheap carpet, tired faces. "I already filed a report yesterday," I told the front desk clerk, handing over a new folder. "This is a second fraud account. $2,000 this time." An officer took me into a side room, young and professional, but disinterested. "This kind of identity use, especially when it's family," he said. "It tends to fall more on the civil side than criminal." I stared at him. "She stole my identity, opened credit, took loans, lied on notarized leases." He nodded, scribbling notes. "I'm not saying don't pursue it, but you'll likely need to file through civil court for damages." I left frustrated, but undeterred. She wanted me quiet. She wanted me tired, but I wasn't either anymore. That evening, I was archiving files when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, Jace, Casey's ex-boyfriend. He looked older than I remembered. Gaunter, the kind of tired you earn over time. I opened the door. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry to just show up. You got a second?" I stepped aside. "Yeah, come in." We sat across from each other, tension filling the space between us. He pulled out his phone. "I think she's still using my mom's info. I found this. An email from a few months ago. Said she was pregnant. Claimed she was in danger. Said you were her emergency contact." I blinked. "What?" He turned the screen toward me. It was Casey's writing, dramatic, urgent, full of lies. She got my mom to send her $1,500, Jace said quietly. I just found out today. Thought maybe I should ask if any of it was real. I walked to the table, brought back my folder, opened it, laid it down between us. We sat in silence. She played me, he said after a while. I nodded. Imagine living with her. His eyes softened, pained. If this goes legal, I'll testify, whatever you need. That night after he left, I recorded a voice note. This is for court, for a lawyer, for truth. I labeled the files. Witness_audio1.wav, loan_doc2.pdf, fraud, case, master.zip. It wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about naming every crack. And who put it there? I was mid-click, dragging the next set of files into a folder when my phone lit up. Mom. I froze, then answered. What the hell are you doing, Keisha? Her voice hissed. You're dragging this family through the mud. Why are you doing this to your own family? She spat through the phone, like I'd personally walked into the living room and set fire to the couch. I kept my voice level. You mean reporting a felony? You know Casey's been having a hard time. She's your sister. She just needs support. She's not struggling, I said. She's stealing, and you've been helping her do it. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to hear the click of her lips pressing shut. Then her tone changed, sweet but sharp, the kind of voice she used when company was over. We're just worried about you, Keisha. You've been so distant lately, obsessing. Obsessing. That word sat in my stomach like spoiled food. I hung up without another word. Later that morning, I got an email from Jace. Subject line, You're not going to believe this one. Inside was a forwarded message originally sent to one of his exes, a woman named Natalia, who had once met Casey briefly at a cookout. The message was written in my name. Keisha here. Sorry for the out-of-the-blue note. I wouldn't ask unless it was serious. I'm in the hospital. We thought it was food poisoning, but they're saying it could be something worse. It went on like a screenplay. Medical bills, emergency contact issues, no phone. If you can spare anything, please Venmo to AK Todd or reply here. The writing had all of Casey's drama and none of my vocabulary. My middle name was spelled wrong, but it had my name, my voice, my tone, badly mimicked. It was the last push I needed. I scheduled a meeting with an attorney that same afternoon. The law office was a quiet unit tucked between a nail salon and a tax prep franchise. The carpet was brown. The receptionist didn't smile much. But when the lawyer saw my file, both the physical one in a zippered binder and the USB stick I slid across the desk, he sat up straighter. You documented everything, he said. I had to. No one ever believed me. He clicked through, eyes darting faster with each folder. This isn't just theft, this is sustained fraud, across multiple digital identities, accounts, and physical signatures. You've got third-party confirmation and digital proof. He looked up. We can file civil and criminal. I nodded. Make it public. The complaint was submitted by 3:47 p.m. At 4:18 p.m., my phone buzzed with a family group text. Mom, Darlene, some people would rather ruin Thanksgiving than be grateful for family. Aunt Gloria, is this about Keisha suing y'all? Casey, you always needed control, Keisha. You made me do this. I didn't reply. I opened my calendar and scheduled something I hadn't touched in 6 years. Therapy, 6:30 p.m., first session. A woman named Lisa with soft eyes and a direct voice. That night I went down my checklist again. Passwords changed, credit frozen, alerts set, all the essentials. Done. At 9:03 p.m. a voicemail landed. I played it once. Casey sobbing, screaming, accusing. You've always hated me. You're trying to destroy me. You think this makes you powerful? No, I think it makes me free. I didn't delete it. I saved it. Labeled it. Voicemail_evidence 1.m4a. Then I opened my planner. Court date confirmed, December 19th. Merry Christmas, Casey. The sun was low when I picked up Hannah from school. Gold light spilled across the cracked sidewalk like spilled syrup, and she was waiting on the bench out front, legs swinging, her backpack too big for her frame. Your mom didn't tell me you'd be here, I said as she hopped into the passenger seat. She shrugged. She said you owed her a favor. Of course she did. Back at the apartment, I made her a grilled cheese and poured apple juice into a mason jar. She sat at the kitchen table, scribbling over a half-done math worksheet, her braids flopping forward every time she leaned down. "Hey, Auntie Keisha?" she said suddenly, not looking up. "Did you ever get that scholarship?" I blinked. "What?" "Last year I heard Mommy and Nana talking," she mumbled. "They said you never found out." My chest tightened. "Found out what?" "That you got into Ohio State, that you were going to go, but then they told them you had money problems." I leaned forward, my grilled cheese untouched. "Hannah, are you sure?" She nodded. "Nana said she wrote them. Mommy said it was better if you stayed close anyway." The room tilted. That year had always haunted me. Senior year, I'd worked hard, filled out the FAFSA, wrote 5 essays, got the letter that said provisional approval. I'd held it in my hands, but the final packet never came. I remember asking Mom about it. I remember her voice. "You probably didn't meet the GPA cutoff. It happens. Be realistic." She'd looked so certain, so matter-of-fact. I'd believed her. Now I wasn't sure I even knew what my GPA was that semester. After I dropped Hannah off, she hugged me tighter than usual. I dug into the old storage box under my bed. Sure enough, the provisional offer was still there, tucked inside a copy of my high school transcript. My GPA had been fine. I scanned the letter, took a photo. Then, hands slightly shaking, I found the email address of the scholarship board. To admissions@ohiostate.edu, subject, scholarship inquiry, 2009, K. Todd. Body, Dear Admissions. I was recently informed there may have been a withdrawal letter submitted in my name in 2009 regarding a full scholarship offer. I never authorized such a withdrawal. Please advise if there are any records of this. Thank you, Keisha Todd. 2 hours later, they replied, "Yes, a letter was submitted by a listed guardian citing concerns over credit health and financial instability. It requested your withdrawal. It was signed by Darlene T. Todd." Darlene, not Mom, not anymore. They hadn't just stolen my name, or my credit, or my peace. They stole my future. They took the door I'd fought to open and slammed it shut. Just so I wouldn't walk through it. Because if I left, I wouldn't be convenient, wouldn't be nearby, wouldn't be available. They didn't just lie about who I was. They made sure I never found out for myself. I sat back, the screen blurring, not from tears. I didn't cry. I burned. And beneath that heat, a new kind of clarity. They hadn't failed me. They had sabotaged me. And now, they'd face me. Because I didn't lose the scholarship. It was taken. Like everything else. Friday, December 22nd arrived colder than forecasted. The sun was out, but the air bit against my face as I walked up the courthouse steps. My hands stayed deep in my coat pockets. Not from fear, but to keep them from shaking from something else entirely. Nerves? Maybe. But mostly it was the weight of finality. Inside, the courtroom was unassuming. Beige walls, worn carpet, a squeaky heater that hummed like it was tired of witnessing people fall apart. Casey arrived last. Beige coat, hair pulled back, mascara smudged like a deliberate act. She looked around, but never at me. Darlene sat beside her, dressed in all black, as if mourning a version of herself that no longer existed. I didn't look at either of them. I faced forward, my attorney to my right, a folder full of truth on the table before me. The judge reviewed the statements, credit card applications, loan documents, the scholarship records, the notarized lease. A case that once felt like a series of gut punches now sat on paper, neat, linear, undeniable. The verdict was swift. Casey was ordered to repay damages and flagged for fraud. Darlene wasn't charged criminally, but her financial involvement was noted in court records. My name was cleared. That mattered more than I expected. Outside, the air felt different. Not warmer, just lighter. Casey brushed past me without a glance. Darlene paused for half a second. "This didn't have to happen," she muttered almost to herself. "It already did," I said quietly. I just finally stopped pretending. I walked away before she could respond. For once, it was me turning my back. Not in anger, but in decision. That evening, back at my apartment, the silence felt earned. I poured a glass of wine, turned off my phone, and curled up on the couch without needing a distraction. Around 9:15, something slid under my door. No knock, no voice. A plain white envelope. Inside was a photo, me, 17, holding baby Hannah under a plastic Christmas tree. On the back, in looping handwriting that was unmistakably Hannah's, it read, "I'm sorry for how my mom treated you. Thank you for always being kind to me. H." My breath caught, not in sadness, in release. I placed the photo in my desk drawer, beside the folder that used to hold my case. There was no victory party, no celebratory text, just quiet. And that was enough. No holiday cards went out for me this year, no calls, no forced dinners. I walked to work that Monday in the cold, scarf tight around my chin. My inbox dinged. An email from Mom. I stared at it, then deleted it without reading, not in anger, in peace. And that's the thing no one prepares you for. Freedom doesn't come with trumpets. It comes with quiet, clean space, blank pages. Some people ask if it was hard cutting off my family. No, what was hard? Was pretending they never cut me first. I used to think speaking up would make me the villain. Now I know, silence only protects the ones who count on your silence. This story wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. About reclaiming space they said I didn't deserve. About saying finally, I exist and that's enough. So if you're watching this and something inside you is nodding quietly, maybe you know how it feels to be erased. To be the peacemaker, the forgiver, the one who always folds so the table stays whole. You deserve to be heard without earning it through pain. No one talks about how healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet walk to the mailbox without dread, or deleting the text you don't owe a reply to, or waking up and not waiting for chaos. So now I'm asking you, have you ever had to cut off someone you love just to save yourself? Did this story remind you of something buried you've never said out loud? Drop a 1 in the comments if it did, or tell me where you're watching from. If this hit home, I want to hear your story too. And if it didn't land with you, that's okay. Tell me why. It matters that we talk about what's hard to say. And hey, if you're still here and this story made you feel anything, tap that subscribe button. There's more to come, more truths, more stories, more people choosing themselves. Because surviving is quiet, but healing makes noise. Hi, I'm Donna. My boss terminated my contract in front of the entire office. No explanation, no warning. Just silence, and then applause, for someone else. They called it restructuring. My family called it finally facing reality. But it wasn't just the job. It was the name they took off the slide, the chair they didn't save at dinner, the mother they erased by pretending her work was never hers. And then, just when I thought I'd been emptied completely, a janitor handed me a key. To what? A forgotten room. A hidden truth. A map my mother left behind before they buried her legacy under someone else's name. Why did they all keep pretending I was never there? And what was waiting for me behind that door? Thursday mornings at Thorntech always had the same rhythm. The buzz of overcaffeinated analysts, the smell of slightly burnt toast from the break room, and the dull ache in my shoulders that warned me the meeting ahead wouldn't be kind. I walked into conference room B, with my laptop clutched like a shield, knowing what I had poured into this week's financial strategy presentation. 40 hours, at least. I'd finessed every figure, double-checked the forecasts, built an airtight case for the Q2 pivot. But as the projector clicked on, and the first slide filled the screen, my name was nowhere. Presented by Callista Dreven. I blinked, then blinked again. I leaned toward the assistant manager, Kevin, whose mouth was already half open to ask if I was okay. There must be a mistake, I whispered. That's my section's missing. Kevin shrugged without looking at me. Boss wanted it simplified. Simplified. A word that sounded like cleaning up clutter, as if my work had been a mess on someone's desk, and they'd done me a favor by sweeping it away. Callista stood at the front, hair in that neat bun that made her look fresh out of a law school brochure, and began walking the room through the slides I had memorized in my sleep. I watched her lips move, hitting all the points I had prepared. word for word. She hadn't rewritten anything. She had just replaced the name. Mine. I folded my arms to stop my hands from shaking and forced myself to sit still. I'd learned that stillness could be mistaken for poise. Garrison, our CEO, was seated at the far end of the table. He leaned back in his chair, face unreadable, until Callista concluded the pitch. Then he smiled, barely, and nodded once. Clear, concise. Good instinct, he said. Nice job, Callista. The room applauded. I didn't. I wasn't angry yet. Anger requires space. What I felt in that moment was tighter, smaller, like I was disappearing inside my own clothes. Not rage, just a suffocating kind of vacancy. After the meeting, I returned to my desk. My nameplate looked smug. The plant I'd been nurturing wilted a little more. No one mentioned the presentation. Not Kevin, not anyone. Everyone had things to do. Emails to send, Slack messages to respond to. Then Callista came over. Rough morning? She asked, holding out a Starbucks cup like a trophy. Double shot, no foam, I remembered. I stared at the cup, then at her smile. Too wide, too white. I didn't take it. I'd love to pick your brain sometime, she added. I met her eyes. It's not for sale. She laughed like I'd told a joke, but I didn't join her. Once she walked away, I opened my inbox to bury myself in something measurable. But my thoughts kept drifting. Not to today, but to a science fair in the 7th grade. I'd built a model of the solar system out of recycled metal. My teacher said it was brilliant. Callista sang a song from Annie and won a trophy. They told me I was clever, but she was captivating. That was the difference. I made things. She made impressions. At some point, they don't even need to push you aside. You step back by habit. It was past noon when the email came. Subject line, urgent, strategy deck, next week. I clicked it open. Lead contributor, Callista Drevin, again. I didn't even check the attachments. I knew my work was in there. I'd been assembling the draft all month, but her name was the only one that would make it to the top. Again. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. I didn't blink, didn't move, just let the familiar chill sink in. If you erase someone often enough, I whispered to myself, eventually they start to believe they were never there. It wasn't the food. It was the seating chart. By the time I stepped off the elevator into the rooftop ballroom, the room was already pulsing with low conversation and soft jazz. Warm lighting flickered across crystal glasses and gold-trimmed place cards. I scanned the tables, searching for mine. A young man in a black vest approached, holding a tablet. Name, ma'am? Donna Gray, I said, smoothing the sleeve of my navy dress. He glanced at the screen, then hesitated, only a fraction of a second, but I noticed. Right this way. He led me toward the rear of the room, past the donors, past the VPs, past the sea of polished hair and polished shoes. He stopped at a table tucked next to the kitchen doors, where a faint whiff of onions and dishwasher soap leaked out each time someone entered. I sat alone. The nearest guest was 2 tables away, a junior developer I barely recognized. My name card sat neatly beside a small candle that flickered as if embarrassed for me. Placement isn't just about space, it's about message. I watched Callista glide in minutes later, her gown just flashy enough to draw eyes, but still tasteful. She took the seat directly in front of the stage. Garrison greeted her with a hand on her shoulder, like a proud uncle, which I guess he technically was. At least when it was convenient. Dinner started with the usual speeches, numbers that didn't matter, projects I'd worked on being credited to departments, never individuals. Then Garrison stepped up to the mic. Tonight, we celebrate the people who shape the future of Thorntech, he began. And it's always refreshing when that future includes new, bold voices, people like Callista Drevin. Applause, smiles, camera flashes. He continued. Her work in realigning our client strategy showed clarity, vision, and above all, initiative. I kept chewing, slowly. No camera turned toward me. No mention of my name. I wasn't expecting one anymore, but knowing they remembered to exclude you, that burns more than being forgotten. A man in a navy suit sat next to me, halfway through the entree. He glanced at my name card. "You with catering?" he asked casually. I swallowed. "No, financial analysis." He blinked, then offered a half apology. "Sorry, you're just kinda off the radar back here." He turned his attention to the salad. No more words exchanged. By dessert, I was numb to it. Or maybe just full. But that didn't stop Callista from strolling over with a champagne flute. "Great turnout, right?" she said brightly. I nodded once. She leaned in slightly, voice soft but slicing. "Uncle Garrison always said bringing you on was a kindness. Family helping family. I mean, not everyone can survive in merit-based environments." I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind you wear when you're about to lock a door behind someone and not open it again. "Merit doesn't shout," I said. "It builds. Silently." I stood up, excused myself without touching the coffee, and made my way to the elevator. As I stepped out into the night, the sound of laughter followed me only to the threshold. The walk to my car was quiet, but my inbox wasn't. The second I sat down and started the ignition, my phone buzzed. Subject, Q2 keynote pitch. Lead assigned, Callista Dreven. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were cold, my jaw tight. They didn't hire me out of pity. They just never intended to let me grow. The taste of steak lingered, but so did the bitterness. The hallway light flickered as I closed the door behind me. It wasn't the flicker that hurt. It was realizing no one cared to fix it. I hadn't planned on attending the family dinner that weekend. But something about being left out so publicly at the gala, then again by email, again by Callista, made the silence in my apartment feel sharper than usual. I guess I wanted to see if anyone in that house still saw me. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered. Same wind chimes by the porch, same yellow porch light buzzing overhead. As I walked up the steps, I could already hear Callista's voice drifting from the dining room, light and polished, like always. She was already seated when I stepped into the doorway, one hand curled around a glass of wine, the other animated in conversation. No one stood up. My uncle gave me a stiff nod. One aunt looked over her glasses at me and said, "We weren't sure if you'd still show your face after the company dinner." I gave a polite smile, ignored the empty seat that wasn't pulled out for me, and found my way to the one closest to the hallway. Not physically closest to the table, but out of the way. Like always. The roast was being passed around when I joined, and no one offered the plate. I reached for it myself. They talked shop. Or rather, they talked about Callista's shop, her growing portfolio, her new responsibilities, how Garrison was mentoring her personally. No one said my name, not once. "It's great," my cousin Dana offered, "that the company finally has a woman they can trust in leadership." I placed my fork down gently. "I worked there first," I said. 5 years. The silence that followed was jagged. My uncle cleared his throat. "Well, Garrison must have had his reasons." The way he said it, casual, dismissive, made it sound like my demotion, my erasure, was just smart business. Nothing personal, just merit, measured differently. Like I was a decimal point that didn't round up well enough. I wanted to scream. I didn't. Instead, I focused on the mashed potatoes, forcing each bite down like it might glue my jaw together. And then, without meaning to, a memory surfaced. A Christmas dinner years ago. I'd brought a handmade scrapbook of Mom's old art to share, each page carefully assembled. No one flipped through it, not even a glance. But when Callista sang Silent Night, they clapped like she'd won a Grammy. That wasn't the first dinner where silence ate with us. After dessert, I got up to help clear the plates. Just as I reached for one, Callista joined me, a fake warmth in her smile. "You're lucky Uncle Garrison even gave you a chance," she said, voice hushed under the clinking of silverware. "He always said you needed direction." I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction. "Direction and erasure aren't the same thing," I said, my tone level. She blinked once, just once, before turning back to the table. I placed the last dish in the sink, rinsed my hands, and moved toward the front hall. I didn't say goodbye, didn't owe them that. But just as I reached for the doorknob, my uncle's voice rang out. "You've got to stop blaming people just because your mother couldn't handle reality either." That stopped me. I didn't turn around, didn't give him the moment. Instead, I let my eyes rest on the framed family photo above the hallway table, taken 2 years ago. Everyone was in it. Everyone but me. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't what's done to you, it's what's never acknowledged. The hallway light flickered behind me as I stepped out, but I didn't look back. By Monday, the cold from that night had turned into something sharper. Not sadness, clarity. The kind you get when you stop waiting for someone to open a door for you and realize you should have left the room a long time ago. I walked into Thorntech's glass lobby with a slow, measured pace. Early spring sunlight filtered through the windows, too clean for how I felt inside. The quarterly recognition board had gone up just outside the elevator. I stopped, out of habit. 5 names were listed in sleek corporate font, every one of them linked to a project I'd either built or salvaged. My name wasn't there. 2 coworkers, chatting by the coffee station, glanced over. "Didn't Donna handle the beacon rollout?" one whispered. "I thought so," the other replied, "but maybe she's just assisting now." I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Their tone said enough. They want you quiet so they can rewrite the credits. Back at my desk, I clicked open my calendar and scheduled a one-on-one with my supervisor for later that afternoon. The request got declined. I sent another for the following morning. Declined again. When I finally caught him near the break room, he looked like I'd ambushed him. "Just wondering why I wasn't listed for Beacon or Lumicore," I said, keeping my voice calm. He sipped his coffee slowly. "Recognition isn't always about names, it's about culture." I stared at him. "Then why does it feel like I'm being erased from both?" He offered a tight-lipped smile. "Donna, this isn't personal. You're valuable to the team." I thanked him, walked away, and didn't believe a word of it. On my lunch break, I texted Maya. She'd been a friend in college, activist, outspoken, bold. Now she worked in HR at Thorntech, and I hoped some version of that fire still lived in her. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks down. She waved when I walked in, already halfway through her latte. "You look tired," she said. "Recognition's exhausting." She laughed softly, more out of politeness than agreement. I told her everything: Callista's rise, the stolen credit, Garrison's favoritism, the way I kept being positioned as the shadow in every room. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and looked around before speaking. "Look," she said, "I'm not saying you're wrong, but Garrison doesn't take pushback well, and to be honest, you weren't his first pick." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "He only signed off because Callista insisted," she continued. "Said you had potential. He saw it as a family favor." My stomach turned. "You mean I was the favor, not the hire?" She didn't answer, just stirred her coffee like it was going to tell her something new. I thought of the rallies we'd marched in together, holding signs, chanting, demanding more funding for women-led programs on campus. And now she sat here, smoothing the ripples in her drink, pretending that silence was maturity. Some people grow up, others grow quiet. I didn't finish my tea. Didn't need to. As I walked back toward the office, the wind picked up, colder than before. My phone buzzed. It was an auto-forwarded thread from an internal group inbox I hadn't accessed in weeks. No subject line, just one image. A time-stamped screenshot of Callista submitting a file. My file. My original pitch deck. The one I'd saved under a unique naming format I'd used since grad school. The name on the final submission? Hers. I stopped walking, standing in the middle of the crosswalk. A car honked. I stepped back to the curb and stared at the screen again, breathing shallowly. If silence is power, then I'd been arming them for years. I didn't burn it yet, but I folded every corner of that paper with intent. Tuesday morning arrived like a warning I hadn't asked for. A calendar notification buzzed on my phone just after 9:00 a.m. with a subject line that didn't sit right. Compliance review, conference room C, 9:30 a.m. No reason, no context, just a time and a room. I wasn't on any flagged files. I hadn't submitted anything late. But I'd been at Thorntech long enough to recognize when something wasn't just a meeting, it was a setup. I printed my own reports from the last quarter anyway, highlighted my own signatures, annotated my timestamps. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit, carved from years of watching the unprepared get buried. Conference room C felt colder than usual. The windows were frosted, but not by design. Just age and budget priorities. Garrison was already seated when I arrived, arms folded like he'd been there since dawn. Across the table sat a man I didn't know. Pinstripe tie, folder open, no smile. "Donna Gray," he said without looking up. "Thanks for coming. I'm Mark, compliance audit." I took a seat. Garrison didn't say a word. Mark slid a folder across the table. Inside were 3 documents: expense authorizations, internal memos, and a spreadsheet I'd never touched. But my login was stamped on the bottom of every page. "These were submitted from your terminal," Mark said. "I didn't reach for them. Those aren't my numbers." Garrison leaned forward finally, clasping his hands on the table like he was in prayer. "Sometimes mistakes happen," he said, "but responsibility is still part of leadership. You understand that, right?" I stared at him. The calm in his voice was surgical, measured, detached. I understood exactly what he was saying. "You're not here to explain. You're here to absorb the blow." "Can I see the login logs?" I asked. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "If these were submitted under my name, I'd like to confirm the access times." He flipped a page. 3 weeks ago, Wednesday, 2:13 p.m. I didn't blink. "That was the day I was off-site for the R&D presentation," I said. "Ask HR. I wasn't even in the building." Garrison tilted his head. "Maybe you forgot to log out. Or perhaps someone else used your station with your permission." That's when it hit me. 3 weeks ago. The R&D presentation. Callista had stopped by my desk minutes before I left. "I just need a few minutes at your station," she'd said. "Mine's frozen again. Promise I won't touch anything important." I hadn't thought twice. Why would I? She was family. She was mentoring under me. Or that's what Garrison had told people. Now her fingerprints were on my file, but the smudge was mine to clean. Mark tapped his pen once, then twice. "Donna, we're prepared to handle this discreetly, but we'll need a formal acknowledgement of the discrepancy." Garrison slid another folder across the table. This one was thinner, just 2 pages. "Sign this," he said. "We'll process your transition quietly. No further escalation. Clean departure. You'll keep your references." I looked at the folder, then at him. "You don't want a departure," I said. "You want a disappearance?" He didn't deny it, just leaned back and waited. I stood up, collected my own folder. I left their papers untouched. No one followed me out. The hallway was silent. I passed by coworkers who glanced up, then quickly back down. They knew something was happening. They just didn't want to know what. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed. "Callista," one text. "Sorry, things got messy. I had to protect my own role." The trap was built from paper, but I just found the lighter. The hallway was cold, but my hand holding the key was warm. Friday morning hit with a strange stillness. No one at Thorntech had spoken to me since the audit meeting, except in passing, through tight-lipped nods or sudden detours into other hallways. I could feel the quiet preparing itself. Something was coming, and everyone already knew. The quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. in the main auditorium. Mandatory attendance, mandatory silence. I arrived early, out of habit more than obligation. Rows of seats lined the glass-walled room, morning light bouncing off the polished floor. People filtered in slowly, clumping in pairs and trios, voices low and safe, I sat toward the back, not because I wanted to hide, but because I refused to perform. Garrison entered 10 minutes late, flanked by 2 HR officers. He wore a smile that didn't meet his eyes. The room hushed. The air thickened. "We've made great progress this quarter," he began, voice smooth, almost casual. "And with growth comes restructuring, realigning our goals with talent. These changes aren't easy, but they're necessary." I didn't blink. I didn't move. "And so," he continued, "we want to thank Donna Gray for her contributions. Today will be her final day with Thorntech." That was it. No reasoning, no transition plan. Just that one sentence, dropped like a stone in the middle of a pond. A few gasps, some murmured confusion, but no one turned toward me. They looked down, into coffee cups, at their phones, at anything but me. I stood, straightened my blazer, picked up my notepad, walked out without a single backward glance. If this was how they ended people, I wouldn't give them a performance. Back at my desk, a cardboard box was already waiting. A neat stack of my things had been packed. Poorly, impersonally. A HR rep hovered nearby, offering nothing but an awkward half-smile. I added one item myself, a ceramic paperweight from my mother's studio. Cracked at the base, but still heavy. Still real. No goodbyes. No last looks. Just the quiet shuffle of others pretending I wasn't there. As I passed the rows of desks, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass panels. I looked steady, but inside, a part of me was unraveling, thread by thread. At the end of the corridor, near the elevators, I heard it. "Miss Donna," I turned. Alban Reyes, the janitor, stood next to his cart. His gray shirt was ironed sharp. His eyes met mine with a calm I hadn't felt all week. He reached into his pocket and handed me a small brass key. It hung from a frayed piece of twine, slightly tarnished, but warm in my palm. "It's time," he said quietly. 41-28. South Magnolia. She would have wanted you to see it." I stared at him, unsure. "Who?" "Your mother, Eleanor. I never sold the place. Been waiting for the right reason." Before I could ask more, he nodded once and pushed his cart down the hall. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment. The lights were off, the TV silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I held the key in my hand, not as a symbol, not as a mystery, just as something that hadn't been taken from me. They thought they ended me in front of everyone, but someone just opened a door. Sunday morning came with a slow grayness that matched the way my body moved. I hadn't slept much. My dreams were fragmented, half memory, half warning. Still, something in me stirred as I stood in front of the address Alban had whispered 2 days ago, 428 South Magnolia. It was a modest one-story house, worn but intact. A cracked blue door, a sagging mailbox, ivy creeping up the side. It didn't look like much, but I didn't come for curb appeal. I came because it was mine, without ever having been given. I held the brass key in my hand for a long moment before sliding it into the lock. It turned with a soft click. Not stubborn, not stuck. Just waiting. The inside smelled of dust and linseed oil, the kind of scent that clung to old studios, where walls had absorbed every sigh, every burst of frustration, every moment of silent creation. Sunlight streamed through a cracked window, casting a patch of warmth on the floor. I didn't say a word as I stepped inside. My fingers grazed over a worn table, brushes stiff with dried paint, glass jars holding colors long since crusted over. The air held still, but the place pulsed with something old and alive. The studio wasn't big, but every corner told me this was where my mother had poured herself out. In the corner, under a small workbench, I found a drawer with a rusted handle. Inside, a box labeled in my mother's handwriting, "For Donna, when she's ready." I sat on the floor and opened it. There was a letter, yellowed edges, written in careful cursive, hers. I knew the shape of those letters better than my own. If you're reading this, it means life knocked you down hard enough to come back to where it all began. I ran my fingers over the words. I know how this world can twist your heart into silence, how it teaches women like us to shrink our brilliance down to palatable shadows. Don't let them. Don't ever let them. My chest tightened, not from sadness, but recognition. This world was never kind to women like us, but don't let them turn your light into apology. I folded the letter back and held it against my heart. Around me were things I hadn't seen since childhood. Sketchbooks I thought were lost, scraps of fabric from dresses we never finished. I opened one book, and there it was. A sketch I'd done at 11 of a birdcage broken in half, wings soaring above. Taped to the edge of the mirror was a Polaroid. Mom, young and wild-eyed, with paint smudged across her cheek and her hand mid-stroke across a canvas. On the back of the photo, "They don't have to believe in you, only you do." I leaned against the leg of the old drafting table and exhaled. Not a sigh, a decision. I opened the studio windows. The wind carried the scent of old wood and possibility. I pulled the cover off an easel, hers. I adjusted the angle, ran my palm across the worn groove where her fingers once rested. I didn't paint, not yet. I just stood in the light and let myself remember. They took my job, my title, my seat at the table. But not this. This was never theirs to take. As I was cleaning out a lower shelf beneath the work table, my fingers brushed something taped underneath. I peeled it off carefully, a stack of envelopes, aged and labeled, one for each year, and one that stopped my breath. 2020, the day they stole my idea. I didn't open it, not yet, because in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just my mother's studio, it was the archive of every time she refused to disappear. I didn't leave with just a key, I left with a roadmap. By Wednesday afternoon, the light in my apartment hit differently. It wasn't softer or warmer, it was sharper, like it had something to say. The envelope marked 2020 sat unopened on the table, just inches from my elbow as I typed. I'd gone back to the studio early that morning, retrieved what I needed, and carried it home like a piece of my mother's spine. Now, I stared at her handwriting one more time before slicing the envelope open. Inside were sketches. Notes. Margins filled with question marks and circles. At the top of one document, Project Lumen, Predictive Learning System for Client Modeling. My breath caught. That name, Lumen. Garrison used it during last year's Q4 keynote, praised Callista for spearheading innovation. But this wasn't hers. It was Eleanor's. And now that I saw the rough prototype, the old design echoes were undeniable. I clicked through my own saved presentation archives, found the 2022 deck. Slide 12, same visual model. Even the graph axes matched. I zoomed in. There, barely visible, in the lower corner of the slide, a cropped watermark. Elegant script, almost hidden. Eleanor G. They hadn't even bothered to change the font. Something inside me shifted. Not rage, but something colder, clean, sharp. I needed more. I packed my things and drove across town to a rented co-working space I used for contract jobs. Private, quiet. No one from Thorntech knew it existed. I logged into an old email tied to a domain I hadn't used in years. It took 3 tries to remember the password. And there it was. In the spam folder. A message sent 6 days ago from a burner address. No subject, no name. They took your mother's IP and gave it to Callista. Look deeper into the Lumen contract. You were never meant to be more than the shield. There was a PDF attached. I opened it. Screenshots of back-end access logs. Callista's credentials downloading files tagged EG prototype and archived Izei, Eleanor G. Timestamps matched the week before her presentation. Another image, a Slack chat snippet. Someone saying, "Just rebrand this before she sees it." No names, just proof. Enough to make denial a joke. I printed everything, sorted the pages into labeled folders. IP theft, Eleanor access logs, Donna speech draft, Garrison Sach 2022. Each folder felt like a rung on a ladder I didn't know I'd been building. Not out of revenge, but correction. This wasn't sabotage. This was structure. And I'd seen how to dismantle it, one document at a time. I opened my encrypted document folder, started a new file, titled it Exhibit A. They knew. Then I set up a small camera on the table, pressed record, and spoke. My name is Donna Gray. I've worked at Thorntech for nearly a decade. I am the daughter of Eleanor Gray, the original developer of the Project Lumen model. This is what they never expected me to find. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I spoke like a woman who had been erased and finally found the original ink. They built their story using her silence and my erasure. Now I'll use their own blueprint to collapse it. I hadn't planned on building a future that night, but someone just handed me the first brick. The invitation list was short, on purpose. Just enough to fill the room without crowding it. Just enough to make the silence louder when people finally saw what they needed to see. The gallery was small, tucked between a florist and a frame shop on East 28th. I rented it under my own name. No company, no brand, just Donna Gray. And that mattered more than I expected. I arrived hours before anyone else, arranging the pieces with precision. Each one had been chosen, not just for what it showed, but for what it said when placed beside the next. This wasn't a gallery, it was a map. The largest wall was dedicated to the Lumen series, my mother's old designs, reimagined with bold colors and sharper lines. Her hand in mine, layered. Past and present, neither asking permission from the other. But the centerpiece, the piece I knew would silence the room, stood alone. A canvas 6 feet tall, framed in black. A shadowed man at a podium, face turned in profile, hand raised with a document clutched tight. Faint, almost hidden in the corner of that paper, the initials EG in soft script. It didn't need a name. Anyone in that industry would recognize the reference, especially him. Guests began trickling in just before 7. A few old co-workers, a handful of local artists, a blogger who wrote about women reclaiming stolen narratives. I kept to the back of the room, letting the pieces speak. Then Garrison walked in. He didn't come alone. 2 board members flanked him, laughing politely at something he'd just said. That laugh faltered when they looked up. He paused halfway across the floor. His eyes scanned the Lumen series, narrowed when they reached the centerpiece. He didn't ask questions. He didn't have to. Around him, people whispered, "That graph looks familiar. Isn't that from the keynote?" I watched him take a step closer, then another. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw moved, but no words came. Beneath the painting, a simple black stand held a QR code. Several people had already scanned it. Their phones led them to a web page, private, unlisted, clean. On it, the original time-stamped design files, screenshots of Callista's access history, and a side-by-side comparison of my mother's work and the final Lumen release, all wrapped in a calm, measured voiceover. Mine. "We inherit many things," it began, "but theft should never be one of them." Garrison turned to leave, but before he could, I stepped into his periphery. "This is defamation," he said, quiet but sharp. I didn't blink. "No, this is documentation, and if you find yourself in it, perhaps you recognize the scene." He didn't speak again, just walked out, pale-faced and silent. The board members stayed behind, one of them scanning the QR code as I walked past. An hour later, the gallery was thinning out. I stood by the table near the door, packing up some handouts, when a woman I didn't recognize approached and placed a plain white envelope in front of me. No return address, no name. Just a single note inside. "We see you now. Let's talk. Klein Foundation, Creative Equity Division." I folded the note slowly and placed it in my coat pocket. When you paint with truth, the ones who flinch first are usually the ones holding the brush too long. Staying doesn't mean standing still. It means owning the space they told you was never yours. 3 weeks after the gallery night, I stood backstage at the Portland Convention Center, running my thumb along the hem of my jacket. The fabric was charcoal gray, simple, sharp, and mine. Just like the name on the banner behind the stage. Donna Gray, founder, Studio Lumen. I hadn't asked to speak at the Women in Innovation conference. They asked me. It still felt strange, being invited to speak instead of pushed to listen. The kind of strange that made you stand straighter. Through the curtain, I could see the audience filling in. Rows of professionals, thinkers, artists, journalists. Somewhere among them, 5 rows back, Garrison Thorne had taken a seat. He didn't come as a guest of honor. No stage presence, just a name on the attendee list. He hadn't recognized mine at first, but when the screen lit up with the opening slide, a refined, evolved version of the predictive model stolen years ago, his posture changed. He leaned forward, focused, trying to piece together how something he thought he'd buried was now being shown to an auditorium full of strangers. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were warm, the mic adjusted to my height without a fuss. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. Not after everything they'd tried to strip from me. "Good afternoon," I said. "My name is Donna Gray. I'm here to talk about rebuilding, about what happens when silence stops being a strategy and starts being survival." I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I spoke of systems designed to ignore certain voices, of invisible labor, of the quiet thefts that never made headlines but shaped entire companies. I spoke of the cost of staying small to keep others comfortable. Then I paused. Let the room breathe. "Sometimes justice isn't a courtroom," I said. "It's a room full of people who finally know the full story." The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was recognition. Then the applause began, slow at first, then rising. From the stage, I could see Garrison still sitting, his face unreadable. A woman beside him leaned in and whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I saw his jaw tighten. Then he stood and walked out. I didn't flinch. I didn't follow his gaze. I stayed. After the session, people lined up to shake my hand. They thanked me for naming what they'd lived through. One woman said, "It wasn't just a speech, it was a mirror." And then a man in a blazer and wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward. He introduced himself as an acquisitions editor at a publishing house. "We'd love to talk to you about a book," he said. "Something that captures your experience, the rebuild, the loss, the light you created out of it." I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted toward the seats, to where Garrison had been. His chair was empty now, but I was still there. He left the room. But this time, I'm the one who stays. The story wasn't over, but the silence had finally ended. 2 weeks had passed since the conference, but the echo of that applause still hummed somewhere inside me. Not because of pride, though I had earned some, but because it marked the first time I'd spoken and been heard without interruption, without someone else taking credit for the sentence before I could finish it. That morning, the studio smelled of citrus cleaner and possibility. We'd repainted last week. A soft dove gray now covered the walls, interrupted only by long wooden shelves filled with jars of pastels, rows of watercolors, and clean stacks of sketch pads waiting to be opened. I arrived early, unlocking the front door before the sun fully stretched across the sidewalk. The hand-painted sign I hung read simply, "The Eleanor Gray Center for Creative Futures Free Access Studio for Girls." It was the kind of name that sounded official, the kind I never thought I'd be able to place next to mine and believe it belonged. Inside, I made my way to the shelf we'd labeled Eleanor's Archive. A small photo of her rested there, tucked between one of her final sketchbooks and the last palette she ever used. It didn't need to be flashy. It just needed to exist. I took a moment at the door, adjusting the wooden welcome sign slightly, before stepping aside as the first visitors arrived. 2 neighborhood mothers walked in slowly, their daughters clinging shyly to their sides. One little girl, no older than 9, made a beeline toward the back wall, where I had hung one of my newest paintings. It was titled The One They Overlooked. A simple piece, Bold brush strokes. A single empty chair surrounded by blurred outlines. She stood in front of it, silent, then turned to me. "Did you paint this?" she asked, tilting her head. "I did," I said, smiling, "and so can you." She smiled back, small but sure, and wandered to the nearest table, where a tray of colored pencils waited. That moment, tiny and quiet, felt more permanent than anything I'd printed on a resume. A few minutes later, Alban walked in, carrying a small box. His posture was still straight, still proud in the way most people don't bother with anymore. I offered him coffee, but he waved it off and handed me the box. Inside was the original key. "I figured you might want to hang it up," he said. I looked at the brass key resting on the felt lining, the same one he'd handed me in the hallway, when everything felt like it was ending. "Your mother wouldn't have asked for this," he said, voice soft, "but she would have hoped." I nodded. "Hope only works if someone opens the door. You gave me the key, I'm just passing it on." He placed a hand gently on my shoulder, then stepped aside as more guests arrived. Later that afternoon, after the kids left with drawings in hand and smudges on their cheeks, I sat by the window alone. Sunlight streamed through the glass, touching the new floorboards. I thought about Garrison for the first time in days. I could have done more, legally, could have dragged him through filings and lawyers and countersuits, but I would have lost years proving what the room already knew. And I didn't owe the world a courtroom story. I owed myself peace. So instead, I built something he could never take away. That evening, just as I was locking up, my phone buzzed. An email. Subject, Second Chances. Feature request. A journalist I vaguely recognized asked if I would share my story in their next docuseries. The line that stood out most: "We'd like to highlight voices that turned endings into beginnings." I didn't reply. Not yet. I stood outside the studio for a long while, watching the last rays of sun dip behind the rooftop across the street. Inside, the light stayed on, soft, constant. Some stories don't need revenge. They just need to be told without shame. This wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning, written in ink, framed in light, and never needing to be explained again. It had been nearly a month since the studio's opening. Life had taken on a quiet rhythm, one of morning coffees brewed on my own time, of classroom laughter echoing through paint-stained walls, and of moments so small I might have missed them before. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the sunlight making its way across the hardwood floor inch by inch. The email blinked quietly at the top of my inbox. A subject line that didn't demand, but offered: "We'd like to acquire Studio Lumen and its IP portfolio. Offer 8.2 cents. No greeting, just numbers. Terms negotiable," it said. I didn't click reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't hesitate. Instead, I closed the laptop, stood up, and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't survive this to be bought back by the hand that erased me. The following day, I was in a soundproof booth downtown, recording for a podcast titled Quiet Power: Women Who Rebuilt Themselves. The producer had offered me tea and a list of pre-cleared questions, which I'd skimmed and set aside. "What do you want to say to the women listening?" the host asked gently. I leaned toward the mic, voice steady. "That pain didn't destroy me," I said. "It authored the first chapter of the life I actually chose. They didn't cut that part." Later that afternoon, I placed a cream envelope on the counter at the post office. Inside was the final manuscript for my book. The title: The Girl with the Key. I'd spent weeks writing it. Early mornings before studio sessions, long nights after classes wrapped. Each chapter stitched with truths that no longer needed polishing. The dedication, simple and clear, read: "For Alban, the first person who believed I was more than what they let me be." That evening, I returned to the studio. The last rays of daylight touched the sign by the door. Kids had finished their session an hour ago, leaving behind bursts of color on drying canvases and half-cleaned brushes in jars. Inside, Albin was rearranging supplies, carefully as always. "I saved you a copy," I said, handing him the book. He turned it over in his hands like it might break, then nodded once. Quiet, like him. "Your mother would have been proud," he said, eyes glassy, "but I think she already knew you'd find your way." He didn't need to say more. We stood for a moment in that quiet, a space filled with everything we didn't have to explain. As the evening settled, I stepped outside. The air was cool, still laced with spring. Children's voices lingered faintly from down the street. The studio lights glowed behind me, warm, steady. In my palm, I held the original brass key, the same one Albin had handed me when I thought everything was over. I looked at it for a long time. Some doors, once opened, never close, and some names, once spoken out loud, never disappear again.